Hi, welcome back to the Adventures of Nicholas. Gosh, let me tell you a little bit more about this book. So I told you that the computer lost my file on it, and so I got so discouraged by it, I just put it back for years and years and years. And then, as life happens, we go to work for different places, and I ended up working for the Walt Disney Company. And I was a manager of their parades and fireworks, and actually got to work and be the production stage manager, that's a big word, for the Mickey's Very Merry Christmas Parade, which you see on TV every year. And I was so honored and pleased to do that. And in the meanwhile, I was looking all over for this book still. I thought, well, now I'm just going to go and see if I can find it and buy it. And I looked and looked for the author, and I couldn't find it, and I couldn't find it. And then one day, I was over at a friend's house, and he happened to be an animator for the Walt Disney Company, and he worked on movies like Mulan and several others as an animator. And I was sitting in his living room, and he had a stack of books, and they were all Christmas books. And I was like, well, what are all these for? And he said, well, we're looking to see what the next movie will be. And so everybody's supposed to submit ideas. And I was thumbing through his books, just, cursory, just, no big deal. And I opened up one book, and I just started reading it and skimmed the pages really quickly. And of course, after reading this for, 20-some years, I almost knew this book by heart. And the words popped out at me. They were the same words. They were the same book. It was the same book. I mean, it wasn't this book. It didn't look like this, but it was the same book. And I said, Lon, where did you get it? What happened? And I began to cry, and he was like, because I was so happy that I had finally, after years and years, found the book. And he was like, well, here, you can have it. And he gave me the book. And from there, I went on and ordered two more, three more, one for each of my children, and one for me so that I could give the book back to him when I was done. But I was just so excited that I had the book again. And it was brand spanking new and bright, shiny cover. Well, anyway, I'll tell you more about it tomorrow. Let's get back to the Adventures of Nicholas. Remember, he's now working on his own as a wood carver. So let's see where we were. Remember that little boy who didn't have anything, and his father was paralyzed, and he's taking care of the household, but Nicholas was keeping an eye on all of the children. The group finally caught up with Lawrence, who furtively wiped his eyes and mumbled something about having to be home anyway. The boys tried to distract his attention from the thoughtless remarks by talking about the man they had just left. That's Nicholas, the wood carver. He's wonderful, volunteered one boy. Every Christmas now, at least ever since I can remember, he's been leaving gifts at the doors in the village. Not every door, said another. He only leaves them at the houses where he sees the embroidered bag. My mother told me that since the village has grown, Nicholas doesn't know every child the way he used to. So how does he know which house has children and which hasn't unless there's a bag? Yes, chimed in another. And how would he even know how many gifts to leave unless there was a bag for each one? So they went on and on about the wonderful things Nicholas gave them, quite forgetting little Lawrence, trudging along with his heavy sled, and his heart growing just as heavy with each step. When he reached home, his mind was still occupied with the information he had heard that afternoon. It would be wonderful for little Friedrich to have a gift from that kind man. Of course, it didn't matter so much about him. He was an 8-year-old and didn't mind, at least not very much. If he didn't get a toy, because when in the world would he have time to play with toys? But the problem that began to spin around and round in his head was, how could he fix it so that Nicholas would know there was a little boy in the house? That night, he tried to get his mother interested. Mother, he began somewhat doubtfully, for he well knew how tired she must be and would be unwilling to listen to nonsense about Christmas toys when her mind was occupied with the problem of where to get the next meal. Mother, do you suppose we have a bag in the house? A bag? What kind of bag? She asked, astonished. Well, it should be an embroidered bag, really, but I suppose any bag would do. You hang it outside the door Christmas Eve, and then when Frederick wakes up in the morning, there's a fine toy for him. It's Nicholas the woodcarver who does it. And I thought that if there was only some kind of bag around here. The mother sighed. Those things like flour and potatoes come in bags, child, but those are things we haven't seen in many days. And goodness knows when, with all my worries, I have no time to make you one. Forget about this Nicholas person anyway, she finished bitterly. I don't suppose he'd come to poor children like you anyway. So Lawrence was forced to abandon the idea of a bag to hang outside the door of Friedrich's Christmas gift. But he couldn't forget about Nicholas. Why, out there in the forest, he looked like such a kind, jolly man. He wouldn't pass by a child's house just because he was poor. He thought and thought until finally Christmas Eve arrived. He was sitting by the fire, helping his little brother to undress. He sat staring into the fire, while Friedrich capered around in his little nightshirt, taking advantage of his big brother's thoughtful moment to play just one more minute before going to bed. Lawrence absent-mindedly began to make a neat pile of the little fellow's clothing so it would be ready for him in the morning. As he picked up a little stocking, long and warm and woolly, he held it up and said jokingly, "Now that would hold some kind of gift just as well as any embroidered bag." He stopped short, stared intently at the stocking. "Why not?" he murmured to himself. "Why not?" Little Friedrich looked frightened. Lawrence, what are you looking at my stocking for? What are you going to do with it?" Lawrence gave out a joyful shout. "Do with it? I'm going to hang it outside the door." And with one leap, he flung open the cottage door. Christmas Eve in the village, a bright winter moon shining in the star-filled sky, glistening white snow banked everywhere on the roads, on the rooftops, on the fences and in the doorways, houses darkened and inmates all sleeping soundly, not a soul stirring in the streets, but one figure, which stole silently from door to door, leaving bulging bags filled with gifts. At Lauren's doorway, the figure paused. In the bright moonlight, there was a funny object to be seen dangling outside the door. A child's woolen stocking. Nicholas laughed silently, a kind, tender laugh, then reached down into his pack and filled the lonely little stocking to the top. And with a snap of his whip and a jingling of sleigh bells, he was off to the next house. The next morning, little Friedrich was presented with not one nor two, but 5 tiny little toys, boats and horses and sleighs, and in the bottom of the stocking, way down in the toe, were 5 large pieces of gold, enough to keep a whole family through the winter. Little Friedrich shouted with joy. The father almost sat up in bed in his excitement. The mother's eyes were bright with happy tears, and Lawrence hugged close to his heart the first Christmas stocking. I've decorated mine. Do you have yours decorated? Chapter 7. Squire Kenson, the richest man in the village, came driving up to Nicholas's cottage door one day with a commission to carve a new chest for his youngest daughter, who was planning to be married. Nicholas was attracted by the sound of silver bells and reindeer hooves on the snow. He looked out of his window and saw the beautiful equipage where the squire traveled in, a shiny red sleigh drawn by 2 beautiful reindeer. Donder and Blitzen they were called by the children of the village because they traveled so swiftly, like thunder and lightning. Nicholas gazed at the 2 beautiful animals and thought how much more rapidly they would carry him about on Christmas Eve than his old horse, who was getting slower and slower as the years went on. Then Nicholas hastened to open the door for the squire, who stated his errand briefly and gave direction about the size of the chest and when he expected it to be finished. All the while he was talking, the woodcarver was gazing admiringly at the fine suit of red deerskin his visitor was wearing. As he nodded and made notes of the instructions, his eyes missed no detail of the squire's outfit. The suit was made in the fashion of the district. That is, the coat rather long and belted at the waist, the trousers loose and caught in at the calf by shining leather leggings, soft white ermine, which is kind of like a mink fur, bound the coat at the collar, the cuffs, and around the bottom. The same fur was used around the close-fitting red hat. After the squire had finished his errand and had driven off, led by Donder and Blitzen's flying hooves, Nicholas went on with his task in hand, but with his mind on the beautiful red suit. "There's no reason why I can't have one too," he said to himself. "I have all my winter supplies in, and the wood is all paid for, and there's still plenty in the bag of gold that I'll never be able to spend. The widow Arpin could well make some use of it. They say that she's clever with a needle in the village. I think I'll drive over there tomorrow and see what can be done. I've gone around looking like a poor orphan boy instead of a well-to-do wood carver long enough." So the next day, Nicholas paid a visit to Widow Arpin's cottage. "I want a fine red suit, Mistress Arpin," he stated. "You know, the one like the one the squire wears." The woman nodded. "Well, of course, I can't afford such fine, soft deerskin. Besides, there's no time to have all that skin dressed and prepared, and I know very well I can't have mine trimmed with real ermine. Now, what would you suggest?" The widow thought a moment. "Well," she said finally, "we could get a hold of a good bolt of strong homespun from the weaver, and I could dye it myself. I have a wonderful red from stewing the rowan berries. Then I'm sure we could get enough pure white rabbit fur skin from Leaf the Trapper to trim the neck and cuffs. It would make a fine suit, and you'd look splendid in it, Nicholas." Nicholas rose, pleased with the plan for the work. He took out of his pocket a handful of gold coins and laid them on the table. "There," he said, "I think that will take care of the material and labor." But Nicholas, it's more than enough," the widow exclaimed. "Why, half of this would keep my family all through the winter." "Then keep it, woman," smiled Nicholas. "You've had a hard time since your good man died to keep your little family warm and well fed. I have enough and to spare, so let's not quibble over a few gold coins. I'll not be the man to die with a chest found buried under my hearthstone." The widow stood at the door and watched Nicholas drive away through the snow. "There's a fine man," she murmured, the gold pieces jingling through her fingers. "A fine, big man." So she bought the homespun, which she dyed a beautiful bright red. And then a strange thing happened. She had no pattern to go by, as Nicholas was wearing the only tunic he owned and could spare no time from his work to have a fitting, so the widow cut and sewed the suit with the image of a fine, big man constantly before her. Nicholas was not a short man by any means, but he was rather thin, and yet as Mistress Arpin planned and pieced the suit together, she knew she was sewing for a fine, generous man. And made the suit to fit Nicholas's heart instead of his body. On the day the work was finished and the last loving stitch had been placed in the soft rabbit trimming, Nicholas arrived to try on his suit. He went into the widow's little inner room and came out a few minutes later. What a picture he made. "I can't see it, Mistress Arpin," said Nicholas doubtfully, "for that little piece of glass in your room shows only a portion of me at a time. Yet it did seem to go on rather loosely," he finished tactfully, not wishing to hurt her feelings. The widow gave one look and burst into tears. "Oh, Nicholas, I spoiled your suit. I spoiled it. I thought you were bigger. Whatever made me cut it so wide? What shall I do?" Trying to comfort the woman, Nicholas forgot his own dismay at the size of his garments. There's nothing to worry about. We won't worry about it. Look, the length here is all right. It's only that I'm not as fat as I might be. Why, if I ate all the vegetables and the meals the villagers sent me, I'll warrant in a few months' time you'd never notice this extra cloth in this coat. And the trousers will be all right as soon as I buy a pair of leggings to stuff them in. And what a fine cap this is. See how close it fits and how warm-looking this fur band is?" So gradually he made the widow forget her disappointment, and to reassure her that he really did not mind the ludicrous figure he must have made with this tall, gangly form clothed in loose, baggy folds, he insisted on wearing it home, and sat up high on the seat of his sleigh, seemed not to notice the stares and nudges of the villagers. When he arrived home, however, he sat down in the huge suit and burst into loud laughter. What a sight I'm going to make around like this for months to come, and yet I have to wear it out. It would be sinful to waste good material. Then another funny thought struck him. He slapped his knee and laughed again. Perhaps I could even stuff some of my toys into my suit. How the children would laugh. But there's only one thing to be done. It's very clear I'm too thin for my height. I shall really have to eat oatmeal in the morning instead of just a piece of bread, and I must drink more milk and cook some of those vegetables that go to waste in the storeroom. So Nicholas kept his big red suit, and soon the villagers became used to the tall figure in the bright red trousers and tunic and close-fitting stocking cap trimmed with white fur, and the shiny black leather belt and leggings. And what do you think happened after Nicholas had carefully eaten his vegetables and milk for a week after week? His face became full and rosy, his chest filled out, and his arms and legs grew more muscular and rounded, and he even began to acquire, whisper it, a belly. That must have been a fine red suit indeed. And we know about that fine red suit because that's what he wears today. Well, that's all I'm going to read today, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. I've got lots more to tell you about the adventures of Nicholas. In the meanwhile, have a Merry Christmas. Bye-bye.